In the early days of World War II, one of France's most powerful warships found itself caught in the tides of a changing conflict. The battleship Richelieu, brand new and not yet fully trialled, was forced to flee her homeland as France fell in 1940. Over the next few years, this formidable vessel would serve under two flags, endure attacks by former allies, and later return to fight alongside them. From a rushed completion and dramatic escape to a rebirth in an American shipyard and deployments across multiple oceans, Richelieu's saga is one of survival and adaptation. This is the story of France's last great battleship and her legacy as a symbol of French naval resilience. The birth of Richelieu's design can be traced to a naval race in the mid-1930s. When Italy announced construction of new Littorio-class battleships with 380mm 15-inch guns, France answered with a design of its own. French naval architects drew inspiration from the earlier Dunkirk class, but planned a larger, more powerful ship that still met treaty limits. The result was a fast battleship armed with massive guns and innovative weight-saving features. Originally, 4 ships of the Richelieu class were planned, but only Richelieu and one sister ship, Jean Bart, were laid down. The remaining 2 were cancelled by the outbreak of war. Richelieu's most distinctive feature was the placement of all her main guns forward. She carried 8 380mm 15-inch guns in 2 quadruple turrets, both mounted ahead of the superstructure in a super-firing pair. This unusual all-forward arrangement shortened the armoured length of the hull and allowed more weight to be allocated to protection and machinery. Each massive turret was essentially 2 twin gun mounts side by side, a configuration intended to prevent a single hit from disabling the entire battery. Backing up the main battery was a secondary armament of 9 6-inch guns in triple turrets positioned toward the stern. In size and power, Richelieu represented a significant leap for the French Navy. The ship was 813 feet in overall length, with a beam of 108 feet, making her the largest warship France had built up to that time. She displaced over 43,000 tons at full load. 4 steam turbines, supplied by 6 boilers, produced around 155,000 shaft horsepower, driving Richelieu to a top speed of 32 knots, fast for a battleship and comparable to the best of her contemporaries. Protecting the ship was a heavy armour scheme, a belt up to 330mm thick along her hull, turret faces over 400mm thick, and layered decks and bulkheads to guard against shells and bombs. Richelieu's anti-aircraft defences reflected pre-war expectations. As completed in 1940, she was armed with a dozen 100mm 3.9-inch dual-purpose guns and an array of lighter anti-aircraft weapons, 37mm 1.9-inch cannons, and 13.2mm machine guns to provide close-range defense against aircraft. This outfit was typical for its day and would soon prove inadequate against modern air attacks, a shortcoming that would be addressed later through refits. Construction moved swiftly. Richelieu was laid down in 1935 and launched in January 1939. By the time World War II began in September 1939, she was fitting out at the Naval Yard in Brest. With war looming, work was expedited. In April 1940, as German armies pressed toward France, Richelieu was commissioned into the fleet, even though some of her systems were still unfinished. She was now a symbol of national pride and desperately needed for France's defence, a brand new capital ship ready just in time, as events would soon prove. Within weeks of Richelieu's commissioning, France's situation became desperate. In June 1940, the German invasion led to France's collapse. To keep the prized battleship out of enemy hands, French authorities ordered Richelieu to depart for the relative safety of Dakar in French West Africa. In late June 1940, the unfinished battleship steamed out of Brest, carrying as much ammunition and fuel as she could, and reached Dakar in early July. There she fell under control of the Vichy French regime, which now governed France's colonies under an armistice with Germany. Shortly after her arrival, Richelieu became a focus of British concern. The Royal Navy feared that such a powerful ship might be seized or used by the Axis, so they launched Operation Catapult to neutralize French warships. A British carrier task force off Dakar struck Richelieu. Aircraft from HMS Hermes dropped torpedoes into the harbour. One torpedo slammed into Richelieu's stern, blowing a large hole and flooding her engine rooms. Crippled and partially sunk in the shallow harbour, her hull settled on the bottom. Richelieu was left immobilized, but upright. Her crew scrambled to control damage and patch the wound, but the battleship was out of action. In September 1940, a joint British and Free French expedition attempted to take Dakar in what became the Battle of Dakar. Still under Vichy control, Richelieu was partially repaired and able to use some of her guns as British forces, including the battleships HMS Barham and Resolution, approached. Over several days, 23rd to the 25th September 1940, Richelieu exchanged fire with the attacking fleet. She managed to hit one of the British battleships, inflicting minor damage, and, in return, took a few hits herself. A Vichy French submarine torpedoed and damaged Resolution during the fighting, contributing to the Allies' decision to withdraw. In the end, the assault failed. Dakar and Richelieu remained in Vichy French hands. Though she had not sunk any foes, the big French battleship had held her ground and deterred the Allies in that engagement. For the next 2 years, Richelieu stayed at Dakar under Vichy control, her activity limited. The crew and local engineers worked to restore her mobility, but without access to proper shipyard facilities and new parts, restricted under the armistice, full repairs were impossible. By mid-1942, the ship could steam under her own power for short trips, and she even received a primitive air search radar. But she was still far from fully combat ready. The tide turned in November 1942 when the Allies invaded French North Africa, Operation Torch, and the Vichy authorities there switched sides. In response, German forces occupied the rest of Vichy France. The French colonies in West Africa, isolated and seeing the Vichy regime effectively overrun, rallied to the Allied cause. Richelieu and her crew thus joined the Free French naval forces. By early 1943, arrangements were made with the Allies to refit the battleship, since she was now the only modern French capital ship in service. Her sister ship, Jean Bart, was incomplete and immobilized in Casablanca. In January 1943, Richelieu crossed the Atlantic to the United States for a much-needed overhaul. Limping along on 3 functioning propellers and escorted by Allied ships, she arrived at the New York Navy Yard in February. There, American technicians repaired her torpedo damage and executed a comprehensive modernization. Over the next 5 months, Richelieu was fitted with American radar systems and a vastly improved anti-aircraft battery. Dozens of 40mm Bofors guns and 20mm Oerlikon cannons were installed in place of her outdated light AA guns, giving her a defensive armament on par with other Allied battleships. 3 of her big 380mm guns, damaged or worn from earlier action, were replaced with spare barrels from France, and her fire control equipment was upgraded. By the time she emerged from the Brooklyn shipyard in mid-1943, Richelieu had been reborn as a formidable Allied warship. Now under Free French command, but operating alongside the Royal Navy, Richelieu sailed to British waters. In late 1943, she joined the British Home Fleet, based at Scapa Flow. That winter, the battleship took part in training exercises and a minor raid off the Norwegian coast in February 1944, but she saw no major action in European waters. With the Italian fleet neutralized and plenty of Allied battleships available for the Normandy landings, Allied leaders decided to send Richelieu where she was more urgently needed. In March 1944, Richelieu transited the Suez Canal to join the British Eastern Fleet operating from Ceylon. For the remainder of World War II, she served in the Pacific Theatre. Richelieu participated in numerous Allied operations against Japanese positions in the Indian Ocean region. In April to May 1944, she supported carrier airstrikes on targets in Sumatra and Java, standing ready to bombard shore installations or engage any Japanese ships that might appear. Her anti-aircraft guns helped defend the fleet against occasional enemy air raids. By early 1945, Richelieu was a core part of the Allied naval force in the Indian Ocean, by then reorganized as the British East Indies Fleet. She bombarded Japanese-held coastal bases, for example, firing her big guns during bombardments of Sabang and the Nicobar Islands, and provided naval gunfire support for Allied amphibious landings in Burma and Malaya. Richelieu's final wartime operations came as the conflict drew to a close. In May 1945, she was deployed in an attempt to intercept a fleeing Japanese cruiser near Singapore, but the enemy ship was sunk by other Allied units before Richelieu could engage. In August 1945, Japan surrendered, and Richelieu was then sent to help re-establish Allied control in Southeast Asia. On the way, she struck a naval mine that caused minor damage, but Richelieu continued and sailed into Singapore in September 1945 with the Liberation Fleet, a proud representative of France among the victorious Allies. Soon after, the battleship carried French troops back to Indochina, where she served as a floating headquarters and support vessel for the initial post-war French efforts to reclaim the colony. Her secondary guns even fired in support of ground forces during brief clashes in late 1945, likely the last time her guns were used in hostilities. By the end of 1945, Richelieu had fulfilled the mission that began with her escape in 1940. She had returned to the fight and contributed to the Allied victory. The war over, she was ordered home to France, arriving in early 1946 after an eventful and arduous 5-year career. In 1946, Richelieu underwent maintenance and minor upgrades in France to repair wear from the war. Though modern by French standards, the battleship was already somewhat dated in the new era. The French Navy, now rebuilding, faced budget constraints and shifting strategic priorities, with aircraft carriers and newer technologies on the horizon. Plans to extensively modernize Richelieu were quickly deemed impractical. In 1950-51, she underwent a final overhaul to refurbish her engines and replace worn-out gun barrels. But any idea of a full modernization, with new radar or missile weaponry, was abandoned. Instead, the Navy focused resources on completing her sister, Jean Bart, and on other needs. Richelieu nevertheless continued to serve France proudly in the immediate post-war years. She became the flagship of a training and readiness squadron, participating in goodwill visits and naval exercises. In 1947 and 1948, the battleship carried out training cruises to French colonies and ports abroad, showing the flag and allowing fresh crews to gain experience on a capital ship. These peacetime operations were a far cry from wartime battles, but they underscored France's attempt to return as a naval power. By the early 1950s, however, it was clear that the era of the battleship was ending. In 1952, Richelieu was officially retired from frontline duty and reassigned as a gunnery training ship. Stationed in Toulon and later Brest, she spent her final active years as a floating classroom for naval artillery officers and seamen. Her big guns were occasionally fired for practice, but mostly she was used to instruct sailors in weapons handling and naval procedures. In a symbolic moment, Richelieu and the newly completed Jean Bart sailed together in January 1956, the only time France's two post-war battleships were at sea side by side. Soon after, Richelieu's seagoing career ended for good. She was decommissioned and placed in reserve, her remaining crew reduced to a caretaker contingent. For another decade, Richelieu remained in port as a stationary training and accommodation ship. Equipment was gradually removed, and the once mighty battleship quietly aged. Finally, in 1967, the French Navy struck Richelieu from its register. Her nearly 3 decades of service had come to an end. In early 1968, the grand old ship was sold for scrap. Before she was towed away, the Navy removed some artifacts. Notably, several of her huge 380mm 15-inch guns were taken off to be preserved. The hull of Richelieu was then towed to Italy and dismantled in 1968 to 1969. The battleship Richelieu holds a unique place in naval history. She symbolized the determination of a navy that refused to be extinguished by defeat. Her career was marked by an extraordinary twist. Built to defend France, she ended up battling former allies, under Vichy orders, before being welcomed into the Allied fold to fight against the Axis. Few warships have experienced such a reversal of roles. This journey from embattled refuge in Dakar to active service with the Allies made Richelieu a symbol of French resilience and redemption during World War II. In operational terms, Richelieu's contributions were modest but meaningful. She did not engage in any famous ship-to-ship duels, and she sank no enemy capital ships. Yet her presence in Allied fleets provided valuable support and flexibility. Perhaps most importantly, Richelieu's survival and service after 1940 provided a morale boost for France. At a time when the nation's honor was at stake, the reborn battleship flying the Free French flag showed that France was still in the fight. From a design perspective, Richelieu proved to be an innovative and effective warship. Her all-forward gun layout, a rarity among battleships, worked as intended, and she combined high speed with strong protection. The fact that she withstood torpedoes and shell hits and kept fighting was a testament to her robust construction. Lessons from her design were overtaken by the rapid evolution of naval warfare, but naval historians often regard Richelieu as one of the finest battleships produced under interwar treaty limits. When Richelieu was scrapped in 1968, her sister ship Jean Bart, following in 1970, marked the end of the line for French battleships, and indeed, the waning days of battleships worldwide. Today, Richelieu's legacy lives on in the historical memory of the French Navy. Naval history enthusiasts remember Richelieu as a last gunslinger of the battleship era, a ship that arrived just as the age of naval gun duels was ending. Above all, the story of Richelieu stands as a testament to adaptability and perseverance. Through changing allegiances, fierce battles, and sweeping technological shifts, the French battleship Richelieu served her nation with distinction, earning a lasting place in naval history.